All right, so you guys sent in some pretty wild articles about President-elect Trump, huh? Greenland, the Panama Canal, throwing some shade at Canada? It's like he's trying to redraw the world map, right?
Yeah.
We've got reports from the New York Times, Al Jazeera, even The Guardian got in on this, so let's unpack this whole thing, see what we can make of it.
Yeah, it's like all these places, these comments, they seem kind of random at first, right? But they actually tell us something about how President-elect Trump sees, like, America's place in the world, you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So let's just start with what everybody's been talking about, like Greenland, right? Don Jr. just visited, which is interesting. And, well, I mean, this isn't the first time we've heard President-elect Trump say that he wants to, buy Greenland, is it?
No, not at all. And it's not just like some weird thing he's got in his head. Greenland's a pretty important place.
Yeah.
It's right there in the Arctic, and with climate change and all that, like, new shipping routes are opening up. And then there's all those resources like rare earth minerals, uranium. We're talking smartphones, military tech, the whole 9 yards. I mean, you can see why he's interested, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's not exactly being shy about it either, right? There's this quote you sent me from Truth Social. He says, "Greenland is an incredible place and the people will benefit tremendously if and when it becomes part of our nation." I mean, it's like he's already picking out drapes, right?
Exactly. It's like that whole tone of his, right?
Yeah.
Like he knows what's best for everybody.
Yeah.
Even though Greenland is part of Denmark, they run their own show.
Yeah.
And they've said flat out that they're not for sale.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of like he's trying to buy a house that's not even on the market, right? And speaking of Denmark, like, what are they saying about all this?
Yeah. Well, their prime minister, Mette Frederiksen, she's made it clear that Greenland is, for Greenlanders, not for sale.
Yeah.
So it's like a big clash of ideas, Denmark, like a lot of countries, they're all about diplomacy, working together. But President-elect Trump, well, he's more like, let's make a deal, like it's all about winning.
And you know what else is interesting? Like you mentioned in your notes that Denmark's king, Frederik, he just redesigned their royal coat of arms and made the symbols for Greenland and the Faroe Islands bigger. Think that's a coincidence. Like maybe a little message to President-elect Trump.
Oh, totally. It could be. I mean, symbols can be powerful, It's a way of saying, hey, we're here and this is ours without actually saying it.
Okay, so we've got this whole Greenland thing going on, right? But then he's also talking about the Panama Canal, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was handed over to Panama back in 99, right?
That's right, 1999. And yeah, it's a super important trade route, no question. But President-elect Trump keeps saying he wants it back under U.S. control. He's saying that China's running it, which, I mean, that's not really true.
Yeah.
Chinese companies have invested in some ports nearby, but Panama's still in charge. They make the decisions.
Oh, okay. And I was reading this article in The Guardian, and it was talking about, like, the history of the canal and everything, and it reminded me of that whole thing back in '89 when the U.S. invaded Panama, to get rid of Noriega. And now President-elect Trump's talking about taking back the canal, even saying he might use the military or, like, economic pressure to do it. I don't know. That seems a little intense, right?
It definitely is. He's basically saying that the canal is super important to the U.S. economy for security and all that. But, a lot of people, especially in that part of the world, they're worried, They remember what happened before.
Right. Makes sense. So what's Panama saying about all this?
Well, their president, Jose Raul Molino, he's basically said, no way. Like, he's made it clear that they're not backing down. They're in charge, and that's that. And a lot of other countries are backing them up on this. So, yeah, President-elect Trump's not getting a lot of love on this one.
So it seems like this whole I'm in charge thing, it's not just about Greenland and Panama, right? You also sent me some articles about what he's been saying about Canada, like how it should just become the 51st state. He says he wouldn't, actually invade or anything, just use economic force. But still, it's a pretty bold statement.
That's like, he thinks he knows what's best for Canada, He keeps saying that the U.S. basically pays for Canada, with trade and defense and stuff. He's like, we don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need anything they have. It's like he sees everything as a transaction, Like, who's getting the better deal?
And I'm guessing Canada's not too thrilled about the idea of becoming, like, the next North Dakota.
Right. Yeah. Prime Minister Trudeau basically said, not a chance in hell. Like, he shut it down pretty hard. So, yeah, you could say President-elect Trump's words are causing some tension with our neighbors to the north.
So before we were talking about how President-elect Trump seems to like want to be in charge of everything, right? But there's other stuff going on too, like what's happening in Gaza with those hostages. Hamas is holding those Israeli citizens, and it's a really tense situation. And President-elect Trump is, well, he's not holding back.
Yeah, he's definitely using some strong language there.
Yeah.
He's basically told Hamas, like, straight up that if they don't release those hostages by the time he's sworn in, January 20th, that all hell will break loose in the Middle East. I mean, he even said that Hamas knows what's coming to them if they don't do what he says.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty intense. It's definitely a lot more aggressive than what we've been hearing from the current administration. But like, what does it actually mean? Is he actually going to do something, or is it just like talk?
It's hard to say, right? Nobody really knows what he's going to do, but it definitely sounds like he's like thinking about doing things that, other presidents wouldn't even consider. Some people are saying it's just a way to like pressure Hamas, get them to the negotiating table. But others are saying like, no, he might actually use the military if he has to. It's definitely something we need to keep an eye on, especially with the inauguration coming up so soon.
Yeah, for sure. So you've got these potential like international crises brewing, right? But President-elect Trump's also, making a lot of noise about like domestic policy. You sent me a ton of articles about how he wants to undo a lot of the things that President Biden's done, especially when it comes to energy, right?
Right, yeah. One of the biggest things is this executive order that President Biden signed, the one that bans new oil and gas drilling off the coast, like in all these U.S. waters. We're talking millions and millions of acres. President-elect Trump's been saying that this order is killing jobs and making America dependent on other countries for energy. He's saying he's going to reverse it like the first day he's in office.
Yeah.
And he's going to, boost American energy production. He's saying it's about the economy, about national security.
Yeah, he even said that President Biden basically like threw away trillions of dollars by stopping that drilling. He said those untapped oil and gas resources are worth like as much as the national debt. Doesn't that seem a little, I don't know, simplistic?
It definitely needs some more context, right? I mean, figuring out how much those resources are worth, that's based on like what people think oil and gas prices are going to be in the future, which is like anybody's guess.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even like consider the environmental impact of drilling, or what it might do to like coastal communities, something we see a lot with President-elect Trump. He's really good at like taking these complicated issues and making them sound, simple and dramatic. It's great for getting people fired up, but it doesn't always, tell the whole story.
It's like he's always speaking in headlines, and sometimes those headlines don't really, capture the whole picture. But this whole thing about like challenging the way things are done, even if it upsets people, that seems to be a pattern with him, right? Like, remember during his first term when he was always like criticizing NATO countries for not spending enough on defense? He even said he might pull the U.S. out of NATO altogether.
Right, yeah. That was a huge deal back then. And it looks like he's like picking up right where he left off. He's saying that NATO countries need to spend at least 5% of like their whole economy on defense, which is way more than they're spending now. It's going to be hard to get them to agree to that, especially the countries that are already, having economic problems.
So it seems like he wants to completely change how America deals with the rest of the world. Like America first, less working together with other countries and, maybe using force or threats to get what he wants. It's making a lot of people nervous,
It's like he's trying to like change the rules of the game,
Yeah.
But the question is, will other countries go along with it? Or will it just lead to more like conflict and problems? It's going to be interesting and maybe a little scary to see how it all plays out.
Speaking of changing the rules, you wrote something in your notes that I have to ask you about. President-elect Trump apparently said something about wanting to rename the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes. It's like one of those things that could easily get lost, with everything else that's going on. But it's pretty telling, I think. He wants to rename it the Gulf of America. He even said it has a beautiful name, appropriate. All that.
Really? He actually said that. I mean, I know he likes to think big, but renaming a whole Gulf, come on.
It's easy to just like laugh it off as, another one of his crazy ideas.
Yeah.
But I think we need to like pay attention to these little things.
Yeah.
They tell us something about how he sees the world, like how he wants America to be seen by everybody else. Renaming something as big as the Gulf of Mexico, even if it's just symbolic, it's like it feeds into this whole idea that America is like the most important country in the world, that we can do whatever we want.
Yeah, like he's trying to literally put his stamp on the map, right? And speaking of symbolism, you also pointed out something interesting about about Don Jr.'s trip to Greenland.
Oh, yeah. That picture of him, like, standing right next to that statue of Hans Egede, Egede was, like, this missionary, this colonizer, who basically helped Denmark take control of Greenland. He's a controversial figure, to say the least. So the question is, did Don Jr. choose to be in that picture, on purpose? Like, was he trying to send a message to Denmark?
Yeah, it feels like he's saying, we're here and we're not afraid of you or your history.
It's hard to know for sure what he was thinking, right?
Yeah.
But in diplomacy, those little things can be really important. It's like, every move you make can send a message, and sometimes those messages can have consequences that you didn't intend.
So, like, what does this all mean for the next 4 years? What can we expect from President-elect Trump's second term?
Well, if what we've seen so far is any indication, I think we can expect things to be pretty wild. He's obviously not afraid to, shake things up both here in the U.S. and, around the world. What he said about Greenland, the Panama Canal, Canada, plus his whole stance on the hostages in NATO, it all points to a foreign policy that's going to be, well, a lot more aggressive, a lot more confrontational, and a lot more unpredictable.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be boring. And you know what that means.
More deep dives. We'll be here to, help you make sense of it all, explain what's going on, and try to figure out what it all means for, for you, for everybody.
We'll be watching everything closely, and we encourage you guys to do the same. I mean, staying informed is like the first step to making things better.
Right, absolutely. And on that note, I think we need to take a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes to talk about some of the domestic issues that the new Trump administration is going to be facing.
We were just talking about how President-elect Trump, really seems to like using symbols and stuff. And it makes you wonder if that's part of, why he says some of the things he does, the more controversial stuff.
Yeah, maybe. Like, take that whole Gulf of America thing. At first, it just sounds kind of funny, right? But when you think about it, like, with everything else he's saying, it starts to feel like part of a bigger plan.
Yeah, like he's trying to show everyone that America is the boss,
Yeah.
Not just with actual policies and stuff, but with words, with symbols. Like he wants to remake the world, the way he wants it to be.
Exactly. And that kind of thinking, I mean, it can have real effects. Like, it might make his supporters feel good, but it could also alienate our allies and our enemies. It's like he's playing poker with really high stakes, and the rest of the world is trying to figure out if he's bluffing or if he's actually got, a winning hand.
Right, yeah. Okay, so whether he's playing poker or, I don't know, chess, it seems like he wants to win, right? And that brings us back to the big question, what's going to happen now? What can we expect in his second term?
Well, if we look at what he's been doing, what he's been saying, I think it's going to be a pretty bumpy ride. He's not afraid of shaking things up, that's for sure. What he said about Greenland, the Panama Canal, Canada, plus, the hostages, NATO, it all kind of points to a foreign policy that's going to be a lot tougher, more confrontational, and a lot harder to predict.
It's like he's throwing away the old rule book and making up his own rules as he goes along, but that could be dangerous, right? Especially when it comes to international relations. One wrong move could really mess things up.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to, pay attention to what he's doing, what he's saying, to try to read between the lines and understand why he's doing what he's doing.
Yeah, it's not enough to just read the headlines, right? We need to connect the dots, try to understand what's really going on.
Exactly. We need to go beyond just the words, the rhetoric, and figure out what it all means for, for real people, for our lives.
Yeah. That's what we're all about here, right? Helping people make sense of things, understand what's going on in the world so they can be, informed, engaged citizens.
Absolutely. And because at the end of the day, this isn't just about President-elect Trump, right? It's about all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's about figuring out how the world works and how we can make it better, for ourselves and for the future.
So as you go about your day, keep asking questions. Don't just accept things at face value and try to see things from different perspectives. The more we know, the better prepared we'll be to deal with, the challenges that are coming.
That's right. And who knows, maybe we'll even find some answers along the way.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time when we explore, well, who knows what.